We would like to thank the guild Set Sail for Fail for use of their videos within our guides. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Warlords of Draenor raiding guide. And in this video, we're going to be taking a look at ragh in the Highmaul raid on Mythic difficulty. Now in order to complete this fight, you're going to want to bring 2 tanks, 4 to 5 healers, and then the remaining a mixture of both melee and ranged DPS. Now, because this is the Mythic version of this encounter, we're not going to go back and go over the flexible encounter abilities, as they are more or less the same, but we will make a note of any changes that have been put in place. Now, this fight is pretty much like the normal / heroic mode, however, you do require a lot more interrupts going out, and we're going to speak about that in a moment's time. Now, first of all, what you need to know is that when ragh goes into the middle of the room and starts charging himself up with his nullification barrier, 2 people are able to enter the rune of charging per phase on Mythic difficulty. This is a step up from the 1 player that can go in on the flexible version of the encounter. However, in order to compensate for this, the amount of overflowing energy orbs that are going to fall to the ground are going to have an increased rate of spawning in order to compensate for 2 people going into the nullification barrier and charging themselves up. So that is something you will need to keep in mind. Additionally, on Mythic difficulty, he will also gain a new ability called Expel Magic Fel, which will cause him to expel Fel Magic onto 3 random players, marking them for 12 seconds. Now, when Expel Magic Fel expires, it will create a line of Fel energy between where the wearer gained the effect and where the effect expired. And this Fel energy that is on the ground will persist for 1.5 minutes, and it will inflict a high amount of fire damage to anyone that happens to walk into it. On Mythic difficulty, you'll also have to deal with a new ability called Dominating Power, which will cause Imperator Margok to use the power of the Runestone to mind control all players that come into contact with the overflowing energy. Now, this will grant immunity to all magic, and is removed when the player is brought below 20% remaining health. Now, while under the Dominating Power effect, any player that is mind controlled will be attempting to forfeit 5% of their shield and give ragh 5% of his shield. Now, because of this is an interruptible spell, so you will need to make sure that you have got people interrupting these players as much as possible, but we're going to speak about that a little bit later in this guide. So first of all, we're going to talk about the players that get mind controlled by the Dominating Power, and how you're going to deal with this throughout the fight. Now, because these players become mind controlled and are also immune to all magic effects, you're going to need to get all of your physical DPS players in the raid to quickly focus these players down, and also making sure that their casts of forfeit power are interrupted as soon as possible. If the forfeit power is not interrupted, you're simply going to have ragh gaining more of his nullification barrier, meaning the fight is going to be extended for a longer period of time, and ideally you want it to end as fast as you possibly can. Now, because of this, you will also have to change slightly how you're going to deal with assigning people to certain roles from the flexible mode version of this encounter. And when it comes to dealing with the overflowing energy soaking and gaining the nullification barrier, you want your casters to be the people that are going in and gaining the barriers, as opposed to your hunters like you may have done on flexible mode, because the hunters are going to be dealing physical damage, and therefore they're going to be needed to help break out people that do get themselves mind controlled. As always, any player that does get the barrier on them will need to soak as much overflowing energy as possible, and then your physical DPS just simply need to break the shields on them as soon as possible, and also keep players interrupted. Next up, you've got the new Expel Magic Fel ability, which will be placed on a random player, or 3 random players at any one given time, and it will then track where that player moves to over a period of 12 seconds, and then after 12 seconds, it's going to drop a fire line on the floor, which is going to deal a lot of damage to people if they happen to stand in it. Quite simply, you need to be aware of your positioning while you have got Expel Magic Fel on you, and you need to make sure that if you do have to move, you're not going to move in such a way that it's going to inconvenience your entire raid. So for example, if you're at one end of the room and you need to get to the other end, don't run through the middle of the room, as you're going to put a massive line of fire there. You want to try and run around the outside edge of the room in order to make sure the fire is going to be placed out of the way. Other than those ability changes, the rest of the fight is exactly the same as the flexible / heroic / mythic mode version of this encounter. You just need to make sure that your healers are obviously healing harder in order to compensate for the high amounts of damage that are going to be going out. And you also need to make sure that the 2 people that move in order to gain the nullification barrier from the charging rune are being spot healed as much as possible, because you want to make sure that they're not going to die and that they get the full effect of the nullification barrier so they can soak as much overflowing energy as possible. Other than that, make sure you're not killing each other, and make sure that when it does come to dealing with the adds especially, you're killing them off in the little suppression fields that do spawn and not outside of it, as the AoE they will deal when they explode is very high on the mythic difficulty of this encounter. So that's going to do it for this Warlords of Draenor raiding guide. Hopefully it's going to help you gain some epic mythic loot, which is a bit of an oxymoron there because you can't get epic mythic, it is just mythic loot. And if you do want to view a written version of this guide, then there is a link available in the video description below, or you can head on over to flaskup.com and click on the little Highmaul raid tab at the top of the page in order to view our written version of this guide. Alternatively, if you'd like to stay up to date with future Warlords of Draenor raiding guides, then please do feel free to subscribe to the channel. As always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.